Hello and welcome to the L&D Go Beyond podcast, where we gather workplace learning insights from experts to enable the L&D community go beyond. My name is Amit Garg, and this is episode number 24. And today we have a very special guest joining us, Laura Overton. Laura is an international speaker, author, and facilitator. As the founder of Towards Maturity, she led a global research program for 15 years, bringing a community of practitioners, policymakers, experts, and suppliers together to investigate how learning innovation delivers business value. Tracking the L&D learning innovation journey since 2004, she has authored or co-authored over 70 major research reports and has written over 300 articles in industry publications. The topic that we'll be discussing with Laura today is how can L&D pivot from learning to performance? Laura, so happy to have you join us today. Very welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. And from that description you've just given, thank you for giving me the opportunity to stop writing for a moment.
Yeah, we've of course, interacted and engaged earlier in your Towards Maturity days. We had the good fortune of working with you in publishing a few reports, so that was a great experience. But that's been a few years, so I'm sure you've been tracking what's happening in the world in the last 5-7 years. So it'll be good to get your thoughts on this topic, which is always a big one. Moving from learning to performance, most L&D people would find it slightly difficult. Some are probably successfully doing it, and that's exactly what you've been researching in the last 15, 17, 18 years. So if it's okay, let's get into the topic and just see, what do you think today? Where is L&D's focus on performance really? As in, where do we stand? And if I can add another question, what really ails workplace learning? Maybe two questions in one there.
Oh, wow. And we've only got less than an hour on to look at those things. Let's take the first question. The first question is about where do we stand in our shift from learning to performance. And I don't know about you, but sometimes when you're asked a big question like that, I like to go back to basics. What are we actually talking about here? So for me, when we say shifting from learning to performance is about shifting from how we deliver and produce great learning interventions and experiences and have our focus on what our output, to shifting to performance, which is the results of our output. So that's, for me, is how I see the difference between learning and performance. Does that resonate with you and your listeners before we go any further?
Yeah.
Is that how you define this?
Yeah, I would probably think pretty much closely. Yes, what we are doing is producing assets and interventions, and in a lot of cases, maybe we are not even aware of what's the impact that it is creating. And ideally, the impact should be aligned with what the business desires as the performance of what people should be doing. So absolutely. But where do we stand today? How good or bad are we on that right now?
Exactly. Where do we stand? Well, what I'm really noticing, and to be honest, I've been noticing this throughout my entire career, including the time that I've been researching this process, is that we tend to prioritize the areas where we're most comfortable as learning professionals, where we are most in control, where we can most say, yes, I did that. So what I'm seeing today in all of the research, because obviously the Towards Maturity research, the last time I was involved with that was in 2019. And we definitely saw that a lot of people are looking at defining their impact in terms of how people interacted with them as a learning professional, how many likes that we had, how many completions that we have, how many engagements with our online library through our LMS did we have, and that has led to how much money have we saved, how many people can we reach. Now that for me, I've worked on something since I've left the towards maturity research behind me to kind of open up my eyes to explore even further, led me to kind of really think about the L&D value spectrum. And to be honest, Amit, all of the research that I'm seeing at the moment, the Mind Tools L&D benchmark, LinkedIn, everything that I'm seeing at the moment says that we're still predominantly comfortable, particularly post-COVID, working in that learning value end. You know, how much activity we've had, how much efficiency have we been driving, how much engagement have people. So it's a little bit me-centric still, where we put ourselves at the heart of our evaluation strategy. What I'm also seeing is that high-performing learning teams have flipped that. And to be honest, Amit, I had experienced that in the first 15 years of my career before I started this research program, is that those people who are better able to embrace digital, which was very new in the emergence of the internet, etc., it was very new, but those who were embracing it at the time were those that were better aligned to the priorities of the business rather than the learning priorities that the business put on. So they were more willing to look beyond. And certainly I've seen over the research years and also over the last few years during COVID, those that were more aligned to what does the business need rather than how can I prove myself, those business performance vision, that vision for business and performance has been the thing that actually has helped them ride the wave of disruption as we've gone through. So typically now I am still seeing most of us are operating out of our comfort zone, but those that are operating on the priorities of the business, the performance priorities, they're the ones that seem to have been riding disruption smarter and better.
Excellent. So there is some proportion. I mean, do you want to put a number to that? Is it 10, 15, 20, more than that?
Well, you know, when I originally architected the Towards Maturity research, which I have to say has been taken on brilliantly by, again, Armitage and Anna Barnett at Mind Tools. They've carried on with the same philosophy, the same strategy. But when we originally started, we had an index that we were tracking. And when I closed my tenure with that data, we had said, okay, let's throw it all up in the air and say, you know, is this working or isn't it working? And the models and the indices we were using were definitely still working. So that's where we came up with a transformation curve. But even using that index right now, 56% of their sample this year, 700 global organizations, are still in the earliest stages. And only 10% are in the high performing stage. And actually even more people this year are in the earlier stages. So I think the disruption has shaken our confidence. And I think it's thrown us into digital, but has shaken our confidence as learning professionals. So we're sticking to these traditional comfort areas whilst we're regaining our ground. And no, I'm not criticizing that at all. I understand it completely, but certainly this year's data has shown that more of us, rather than fewer of us, are actually staying in those early stages of maturity, in that learning zone rather than the performance zone.
So just for our audience, you're talking about the transformation journey and the 4 stages. And
Yes.
the first stage we are saying about 56% people and about 10% in the most mature stage.
In the most mature stages, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we can share some links for your listeners as well. Those who like to dig in, you know, those who share our research heart. We want to go, let's get back to basics.
I'm sure a lot of people have already seen that because that was a fantastic report. I keep referencing that. I think it was 2018, the transformation journey. And I have used it in several of my talks and presentations. And I think it makes perfect sense in terms of listing out the stages and also identifying what are the characteristics and actions that people different people in an organization need to do at each stage or should be doing to possibly be getting classified in a particular stage. But what's really coming out, you're saying that the bottom of the pyramid, you are seeing more people are sticking to the bottom now as compared to maybe a few years earlier. So the pandemic has probably shaken their confidence in moving to the higher level, and they are sticking to what they were doing earlier and feel more confident about.
Yes, I think so, because that we're human beings. I love this industry. I've dedicated 30 years of my professional life to this industry. But we are human beings, and we have to stick to often the things that have worked for us in the past.
Sure.
So there's been a lot of change over the last few years where we have been thrown into digital.
Yeah.
Whether we've liked it or not, whether we've been resisting it or not, whether we've been arguing against it or not, we have had no choice. So we have had to adjust and redefine what our role is within that new world of work.
Sure.
So I completely understand why we've maybe stuck to some, we want to keep some things similar, don't we, Amit? Just to give us that. But I think now we've had that disruption, I'm hoping over the next few years we will have the confidence to take a bolder action as we move forward.
Yeah.
So I'm not criticizing our industry at all. I completely understand it.
No, absolutely, and neither am I trying to do that.
No.
Yeah, the way I see it is, one, the digital transformation actually happened without much planning for a lot of companies. So it was almost messy, and it would have been messy if it happens in this manner. And then the universe of companies who are participating in some of these studies may have increased. So the early adopters who had gone on to the digital transformation journey on their own before the pandemic, they may have reached certain amount of maturity. But the ones who have been forced into it during the period of crisis, they can't really go beyond stage one. So if the universe has grown and there are more companies now, percentage wise, that should still not be such a bad thing, because we would expect them to enter the pyramid at the lowest level only, and then probably move up gradually.
Absolutely. We're all on a journey.
Yeah.
Now, whether it's from the bottom of the pyramid to a top, or I like to talk about from the left of the curve to the right of the curve, the most important thing is the direction in which we're facing. If we're starting our journey, but we're looking backwards, then that we will struggle. If we're holding on to that past, we will struggle. If we're starting our journey, but we're looking forward to how all of our experiences can support performance, how we can draw on evidence to support better performance. That's the most exciting place for any learning and development professional. Is wherever we are in our journey is the direction in which we're facing, and the excitement and the hope that we have towards achieving those goals. Because if we're looking in the right direction, there's plenty out there, isn't there, Amit, to be able to help us progress that journey in the most appropriate way for us as individuals and also for our organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's not a big surprise that, a lot of companies who are obviously on the left side are prioritizing efficiency improvement. So all the measures that you talked of earlier are essentially reflections of, is the L&D department or team is working more efficiently as compared to the previous year. So some of those metrics are essentially related to that. But what we are obviously after is impact metrics going forward. So if I can just turn our attention to you use the term high performance learning teams, which is of course from your transformation curve. How do you describe these high performance learning teams? Are there some characteristics that you have observing consistently, and is that itself evolving in the last 4-5 years? So while on the left side you may have new entrants, and they may still exhibit exactly the same characteristics, I assume, is something changing on the right side, and what is it really as of now?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Thank you so much for that. I think to the left, we see ourselves very much as learning producers. Let's produce the right interventions, the right content, whether it's micro, whether it's experience, whether it's but it's about what we produce to support the organization. And I'm not saying to the left of the curve, people are not thinking about impact. Of course, they're thinking about impact. But the characteristics that really separate the high-performing learning team is this concept of team. It's this concept of high-performing learning is not just the responsibility of the L&D team. It's actually the responsibility of the whole organization. So to the right of the curve, what we see is learning and development embracing their role as enablers of learning within the organization. And that organizational characteristic of high-performing learning team includes a perspective on individuals. So individuals are seen as connected contributors. Individuals are able to support each other. So learning teams might be focused as much on, how do we connect people? How do we ensure that we put them in contact with the right people? To the right of the curve, we also see the focus on the line manager. Now, often as learning professionals, we're dealing with the individual. Big tick there. Love that. Customer-centric thinking is always a massively important aspect in deriving value, whatever business you're in. And we also see their focus on senior business leaders, those who are signing off the money, setting direction, telling people what to do. But what we see in the high performing learning teams is the vital and most critical role of the line manager. Not that they become an extension of the L&D team. That's the worst thing that we can possibly do. But, their role in the way that they create a culture of permission within their own team, the way that they create opportunity to practice, the way that they can spot opportunities within the team members to be able to contribute. And I think that's so vital now when it comes down to attracting people to stay around common purpose. So the characteristics, yes, more digitally aware, and to be honest, Amit, probably more likely to be experimenting with digital rather than just using digital to deliver what we used to deliver in the classroom. So yes, absolutely digital. Yes, the focus on the L&D team as the enablers of learning, a healthy focus on the role of managers, on the roles of individuals. And the role of business leaders to be able to create that culture of permission. So those high-performing teams have got that in place. What's interesting is that they're not the ones with the biggest budget. They're not the ones with the biggest L&D teams, and they're not always the great big global corporates. Certainly in the early days of the research, and even now, charities and people who are constrained by circumstance and budget often become the most innovative and the most creative and the most able to see themselves shift from a learning producer, which needs resources, to a learning enabler in the organization, which surfaces the opportunity and encourages and facilitates the organization to learn in a smart way. So hopefully does that give you a few of the characteristics?
It does. And it's very interesting. It actually opens up a few more questions. The last point that you made, it is very interesting. And I was about to come to two main points that you made earlier that I thought were very important. One is obviously referencing to the culture, which is both bringing in accountability and ownership of learning right through the organization, right sort of behaviors, right sort of systems, environment, everything. And also bringing a lot of ownership to the line managers, right from helping designing stuff maybe, or delivering that, or supporting it, coaching, because line managers as coaches could be the best thing to happen for learning to really take place and maybe translate it to performance. But what you said at the very last is that most of these high performing learning teams you are finding where there are constraints, less budgets, small teams, and even smaller organizations. So one could obviously be that because they don't have enough resources, they try harder and try to maximize what they can. And maybe collaboration is higher in those teams. So it is easier to work with everyone. But then it also hints at they are able to influence the culture a little more, positively. It is within their reach to change that culture or influence it over a period of time, as it would be compared to in a larger organization.
I think you're right, because one of the things that I notice as characteristic, and I notice it through the data, and I've noticed it since, because obviously the work that I've been doing since I've moved on from the heavy data, is to research what this looks like in new and fresh ways. So one of the research projects I've been involved with is the Emerging Stronger project. And I think one of the things that surfaced through working with individuals and organizations through that particular project is that it's the ability to tap into common purpose that was so essential. Back probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I co-authored a report called the New Learning Organization, which really looked at this. And what was really central about those high-performing teams then is that the collective purpose, the common business goals that everyone had. Because if you're all working towards the same goals, which is moving from learning to performance, let's work on the business goals rather than the learning goals, then suddenly you've all got a common goal. And I think it helps those smaller organizations. And I think what I've observed in the last few years, the smaller organizations get connected faster to those goals. And I certainly saw that with a piece of research work that I facilitated last year with the CIPD, which is a UK professional organization. And we looked at that. And again, those learning professionals that were embedded within the business seem to be able to drive smarter business performance because they're working together as a team. High-performing learning team isn't just about learning and development professionals. It's about the way that we work with teams on common business goals. So, and you don't have to be a big organization to do that. And sometimes a smaller organization helps you do that faster, smarter, quicker. I don't know whether you've seen that in the work that you've been doing with organizations.
We haven't really drawn that sort of a correlation yet, but it's very interesting that because you have a larger database, of course, of companies and data that you can capture, which obviously may not come to us directly. But now that you've mentioned, and if I reflect on it, possibly yes. The larger the organization, more difficult for them to really make that shift, because even if an individual or a group of people really understand what needs to be changed, they may not always have the influencing power to change that or make that change. So, I mean, like I said, once you've said it and I reflect on it, possibly, yes, we may have seen this, but we may not, never had taken notice of it yet.
Yeah, but I think the closer, again, it's always about the closer we can get to working on the goals that matter to the business, the more credibility that we'll have, the more curiosity we can, we don't have to be expert in the business, but if we're interested to know, if we're interested to find out, if we ask the right questions. Now, you can call it performance consulting, you can call it critical task analysis, and we've got loads of models to help us do this smarter. But ultimately, it comes down to our basic interest and desire to want to be part of what's going on in the business. And I think the more curious we are, the more confident we are in embracing some of these incredible tools and models that are out there that equip us to do that. In my research, I've always been very model agnostic, but I've always talk to people like, I think you've had Charles Jennings on your podcast, and to say, look, Charles, what does this mean if we unpack the models? What does the behavior look like? So let's deconstruct some of this to look at the principles behind it. And as Charles will say, the closer you get to business, the closer you support people at that point of need in the business, the smarter, better results you're going to be able to get.
Yeah. That reminds me, we actually had a conversation which is very similar to this one in terms of the topic. The theme was moving from learning to performance, or bridging the gap. And one of his, initial comments was that we still sometimes miss the performance mark because we think schooling is learning.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
because of that model that we have in our mind, we still believe anything which is like schooling is probably leading to learning.
Yeah.
But that's not what, we should be really looking at. So of course, there's a very interesting set of things that he was
Yeah.
sharing that day, which was very insightful.
Yeah. Very powerful thinker. Love working with
Excellent. All right. So if we can look at, and you may have shared one or two things on that already, but if you were to suggest to L&D teams which are wanting to move from left to right, what are the things in your view? Let's say top three things, if you want to put them that way, or if there are more. But what is it that they should be doing to start making that shift? What is it that is really required to move from focusing on, learning assets efficiency or learning delivery efficiency to getting to a high performance learning team?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually, I think it also helps to look at some of the barriers that are stopping us. And I know you asked me that up front, and I got carried away. Not we got carried away, I got carried away. So some of those barriers that people are saying really stopping them from progressing to performance. There's quite a lot of blame culture. I saw that in my own research, and even in the current L&D benchmark research, sort of like line managers don't provide enough time, that individuals don't have the motivation to get involved with learning, the L&D people are overwhelmed and just being crushed, really, that kind of overwhelmed and unequipped to be able to respond to what's needed. There's a real pressure going on, and I think it's really helpful for us to be aware of what people believe, that the profession believes is crushing them and holding them back. Because there is absolutely no denying that the cultural atmosphere of an organization can feel very frustrating to a lot of learning professionals, and feel, if only I was working in a great culture. So I think the first thing that I would say is, how do we move from left to right? Is to look at our own inner game. How do we think about our environment? And I've been looking very much into that kind of cognitive behavior cycle of, our behavior, what we do professionally, actually is as reliant on how we think as individuals and how we feel as individuals, and our thoughts and our feelings influence our behavior. Our behavior influences our thoughts and our feelings before we even start to work outside. So for me, what I've noticed in the last few years is that those who are transitioning to performance, have got different thinking habits. I've started to talk about this as thinking habits.
Okay.
When they think about their value, they see themselves there to drive value in the business rather than drive learning value. Those who think about their value in terms of their outcomes of their learning interventions, I am successful personally because of I've won an award, I've got all these peppy sheets coming in, I've got, look at my they use their benchmarks as their engagement strategies, all of that. When you think about your value in that context, it can actually hold you back from driving performance, because driving performance, as we've already said, it's a team, it's a collaboration. You're not in control of it. You've got to work with the business to drive performance. And you're out of control. Whereas high performing they think about their value as driving business value. So their behavior then becomes more curious. They're more desire to experiment, they're more desire to work with rather than to prove themselves. So I think our thinking habits as individuals are really, really important. And sometimes we need to look inwards, because we might be given a beautiful gift of an amazing opportunity, but if we are still trying to prove ourselves, we might not be able to take full advantage of that. So, and there are a number of thinking habits that I think are really important. I think the way that we see our own expertise is important. Do we see ourselves as being, I am the expert in learning, or do we see ourselves as I'm an explorer? I can bring my expertise to the world of business and therefore explore how it can be combined with what's going on in business. So I think our internal views and thoughts are really, really critical. And there's a number of those. So that's the first thing, because we have to look in.
Yeah.
Do we really believe that we can add value?
Yeah. And if I can just, stop you there for a moment to add to that, it's almost like the foundation, you know,
Yeah.
we won't be able to do anything unless we believe in something, right? So we can do a lot of compliance training. So let's say unconscious bias, you can do a lot of training on that, but it is very hard to take it away, and something similar, if as L&D people, if we start believing this is what success means, or this is what we are here to add value, or this is what value looks like, then all the actions that you're taking possibly gets aligned a little better than what if you were holding on to some other values or beliefs.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. So I think this is so important that it's that we do need to believe in ourselves. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
We need to believe in ourselves, and that's where data for me has been such a critical enabler, because it says, look, it's possible.
Mm.
It's helped me to believe in the industry.
Mm. Yeah.
Hopefully, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Would you like me to go on a little bit more in terms of some other things that can help us to do that?
Yes, absolutely. So apart from thinking habits, which is kind of changing your, if I can call it, belief system, in what you add value as and what you need to do, what are the other things, if you can share, that L&D should be able to do if they want to move from left to right?
The next thing I think that is really, really important, and these are broad brushes, because the research program is out there to show you the detail of it. But the next thing I think is to take advantage of the opportunity that you have in front of you. Because some organizations, let's say, I would like to work with the organization in more detail, but at the moment I'm still stuck being an order taker. The organization comes to me and says, I want training, improve this, and there's a clash. It feels like there's a clash and there's a frustration. So my suggestion would be, from what I've observed and what I've seen in the data, is that we take advantage of every opportunity that we have. That if someone comes to us and they ask us for a program that we can start that cycle of good questioning that allows us to challenge it. If someone expects to be able to shift everyone off to a course, we can start to maybe share evidence to say, if we do it in a different way, I might be able to improve productivity within your team between 2 and 3 times. That's from the data that allows us to see that. Is it worth us trying just a few different things within that context to work together? So I think that, in the way that we design learning, not just, as you say, or as Charles was saying, as schooling, come to me, I will give you stuff. I'll give you a tiny opportunity to practice completely out of context. And then I expect your skill to be up here and your behavior to have changed. It doesn't work like that. So if you've been given an opportunity to address a behavior change, let's explore how we can work with that team to encourage that behavior change. Let's make it easy for the line managers to create the opportunity for people to practice. So one of the things that I've developed as part of a collaboration I've been working on is a tiny tool called the Power Hour. It's just a tool that can be adapted by L&D people to work with managers. So if you're encouraging an initiative, why don't you give the manager a tool that allows them to do a regular check-in? You give them structure. It's a meeting in a box, something that helps them to embed this without them feeling that you as a learning professional has let them down. So it's the small things. That's what I'm saying. If we're being asked for a program, let's think about the evidence-informed design principles that drive better skills, and then start to sneak them in to our orders so that people can start to experience a new way of working and the impact that that has on the team.
Mm.
So, our thinking habits is one, our process of sneaking stuff in
Yeah.
against the grain, to seizing every moment, carpe diem, seize the moment to try something new, to explore something new in the context of the problem that you're dealing with. And then I guess it's not the final thing, but another key foundation is to, I always used to say this before COVID, but for us L&D, we need to put our own masks on first.
Mhm.
And even, I was always borrowing from the traveling industry there, but, we need to embrace this for ourselves. We need to embrace experimentation. We need to embrace, let me try a new skill. Let me build my skills. Let me try my influencing. Let me be free, have a culture of permission, a psychological safety, even within our own teams. Because if we can't allow our own teams to feel safe, to experiment, to try something out, even doing it amongst ourselves, then we will really struggle. Now, these are broad brush principles. You layer on top of that digital, you layer on top of that effective instructional design processes, you layer on top of that models like 70-20-10 and social learning, collaborative learning. There are many practical things that we can do within that, but our thinking habits, our willingness to seize the moment with every moment we have in order to model what it means to be at the right of the curve and to model that amongst ourselves, I think are really important principles that will help any person on the maturity curve, anyone who is looking to the right, looking to performance, to be able to make one more step in that direction.
Excellent. I think it's a good list of things that L&D can refer to and hopefully try doing some of those. The number two that you mentioned about, which is more about consulting, trying to move from order taker to becoming a partner and providing solutions which can really deliver value. Do you see L&D needs to get really skilled, which is the third point, which is embracing some skill development for themselves, because consulting may not be a natural skill for a lot of them, or maybe they haven't tried, so they don't feel confident. So it's one of the areas that probably L&D needs to get better equipped to be able to serve at a higher level and deliver maybe a different kind of value.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it may be that our consulting skills aren't where we're most confident. And we may think, actually, we're designers, we're instructional designers. Or we may be that we're HR or learning and development business partners. Do you know what I mean? Everyone has got a different role in that kind of learning ecosystem. But what holds all of this together is a desire to work towards the common purpose, and that the purpose is the purpose of the business. And I think there are a number of different skills that we need to be focusing on. Yes, our questioning skills, our ability to surface what is the problem here. But it's also, and I know, Amit, from your reading list that you've been sharing, that we've been reading a lot of similar books on it's the way that we design our interventions. So when we are getting involved in the design of something, a formal response to a need in the organization, how do we design? How do we incorporate evidence-informed design principles like spaced repetition or reflective exercises? And so we need to have skills in those areas to understand how to change behavior, not just skills on how to create great content. So I think that is part of that second, the little trials, the little things that we experiment with, because we may do an incredible performance consulting job, but the customer still says, no, I still want one of these. I still think you need to do this. So in which case, then you have to say, okay, well, let's try and address the challenge that we think is there, but in responding to the actual customer's needs. So you're that's what I mean about sneak. Sometimes we've got to sneak in stuff And if we can't get the business goal from performance consulting, then maybe what we have to do is look at our design process to get closer to that business outcome. Maybe it's the way that we work with the individuals in that design process that can help us to do that. And then we can loop back around to the business leader at the end and say, actually, as a result of our design, we've been able to surface some of these challenges and meet some of these challenges. So I think it's our skills across all of those elements that make sense. We are working as a team in that space, and we need to give ourselves permission to experiment and try and to dig in, because sometimes the door will be shut. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I know, and I'm thinking about something else that probably is, a related challenge. So let me try and bring in that. So I completely agree that, with the third thing, which is embracing, all of that change ourselves first. And that could mean adopting better, learning practices, like you said, spaced repetition, reflective exercises, etc. And once you do that, and if L&D teams are able to do that within their teams, I think that will give them confidence and conviction to go and consult better. So if you do that in a honest manner, you get more capability in number two, which is capable consulting. However, it seems, and this is my understanding, everybody is really, really fighting for time. So L&D teams, like you mentioned, they're overburdened. So they're themselves fighting for time. Their clients are fighting for time. So they don't have enough time. So they can't really experiment with themselves to see how it really works. So what is good in theory, they can't really implement. So they can't get conviction. So they can't go and convince their stakeholders, and stakeholders are already constrained for time. So is time becoming a big challenge for both L&D to evolve in their own skills, and also to take it back to the stakeholders who don't want to really, they would simply say, I just need this fast, get it done. So everybody is just in a hurry without focusing on the core of what you have to really develop and deliver.
Time's always been the big barrier. It always has. And time is the big barrier for those high-performing learning teams as well. So we need to look at how do they address the issue of time as well. And one of the words that you used at the beginning of this conversation, Amit, was this concept of pivot. And in the transformation curve, that was the aha moment for me after working in the industry for quite a few decades and looking at this data for 15 years. What we started to notice in the data was that to move forward, sometimes you have to let go. And the issue of time means when you're trying to pack more and more and more into the time resources that you have available to you. So we certainly saw in the data, and anecdotally through the stories since, is that people use their time differently and they are willing to let go. So they're willing to let go if they see that normally their expertise, they see themselves as an expert in instructional design, is creating incredibly powerful and connected learning experiences. But actually, what the customer needs is a really elegantly designed job aid.
Yeah.
It's very difficult for them to let go of the opportunity to show their amazing skill in order to drive a job aid. Now, I'm not saying that the high-performing teams do not design incredible learning experiences. They absolutely do. And it's a misnomer that the high-performing teams are not doing formal learning. They absolutely are. But they know where to place their priorities.
Right.
And where to add value with speed, and where to act fast, maybe creating a meeting box for team like the Power Hour for for their line managers to take action and where they need to take action. So you need to be able to let go. And that for us was, we identified in that transformation curve a number of pivot points of change that we have to be able to do. And sometimes the thing we have to let go of is our past success. And that's the toughest thing. When you're on the speaking circuit, having an amazing amazing project that you did, and everyone's, oh, how did you do it? And sometimes, and to let go of that in order to brace something that's going to work in that team in a new way, in a new context today, that's the toughest thing. But high performing teams are as time starved as those to the left of the curve. It's just that they've learned to let go. They've learned to see themselves as enablers, not just producers. And that kind of, again, comes back to the fact that we're a team working on performance. We've all got a role in here. And how do we help individuals, teams, managers, organizations to embrace their role in this learning process?
Excellent. And that now reminds me, absolutely, on the transformation curve, letting go, I think, between second stage and third stage is a very important characteristic. And based on today's conversation, I'm linking it back to the first point that you mentioned of the three, which is values or your beliefs. So if those are aligned, probably letting go will be easier, because you'll start realizing some of the things that you are currently being appreciated for or receiving awards for is not as valuable to the organization. So do you see that connect there?
Absolutely. What we found right in the heart, the thinking habits ideas only surfaced for me when I was doing a series of podcasts along with my collaborators on Emerging Stronger, Michelle Lockers and Shannon Tipton. We were right in the heart of COVID, where we had no idea what was going to go on. It was right in the summer of 2020. We did 30 interviews with people to say, how do we emerge from this? And some people were saying, well, actually, we're okay, we're doing, but that's where I personally started to notice it was their attitude, it was their approach. They were thinking business first. They were thinking, we're here to work with the business, not to respond to the business. They were thinking about speed. That it was about a responsive process. They were thinking about risk and how they had to let go rather than to hold on. And it released those people in those interviews. They weren't struggling. They were saying, actually, it's tough. We're going the same disruptions as everyone else. But those thinking habits enabled them to ride the wave rather than be drowned by it. And that was another aha moment for me. That's the thing I love about exploring in this world of L&D, is that when you have open eyes, you can start to see things that suddenly start to make sense that you didn't see before. And for me, letting go of the data that I was looking at has allowed me personally to be able to see different patterns, different opportunities that kind of really do make sense in this new world of work.
That's very interesting. So of course, pandemic threw big challenge to everyone, and like we discussed at the start of this conversation, a lot of them would have entered into digital space by force, not well-planned manner, etc. But the others, apparently, what's coming out from your interviews at Emerging Stronger, were actually getting more aligned, because in moments of crisis, they were able to really align them better. And we just hope that those behaviors stick and they are able to continue on that journey and, deliver a different kind of value compared to what they would have done before the pandemic. So that's a great sign.
Yeah, I think so. And one of the challenges is that we've rushed into digital and we've not necessarily been leveraging digital in this way that we've been talking about today as an enabling tool and technology to enable us to have these different levels of relationships, these different opportunities to respond to the need in hand. And I think one of the challenges that I've seen in the past, which actually kickstarted my original research, is that when people flood into digital and get it slightly wrong, try to put their old models into a digital world, it doesn't always work. And then that almost reconfirms the fact that, oh, I told you it wasn't going to work. And that means that we're even more likely to hold on. Yes. So I think, one of the challenges is for us to continue to have that aspect of curiosity, aspect of exploration. Let me try something. If it didn't quite work, I wonder why, rather than I told you it wasn't going to work. It's almost like, again, our thoughts influence how we feel about things and influence our behavior. And you can see here that kind of behavior and thinking habit of exploration, of curiosity, of wanting to find out more and to try new things, that when we combine with this incredible evidence base that we have in our industry right now, that's the evidence base is what reduces our risks. If we become more evidence informed, then it allows us to experiment more.
Yeah.
And it allows us to try things for ourselves in our own context. And I think that's so vital for us if we're to move.
Yeah. No, I'm definitely seeing a shift towards adopting more evidence-informed practices. And I just hope that it's going to become more widespread going forward. I think we pretty much covered everything. Anything else that you may want to share, which we may not have been able to touch on and which will be useful, for teams that are trying to make a journey from left to right?
I think the critical thing that we can learn is that we need to be bold in our action.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not talking about like brassy bold, I don't know whether it's an international expression, but this kind of concept of bold as brass, that you just walk in and you can say anything and you try anything. And it's like, and most of us who are introverts are like, no way am I going to be doing that. For me, it's about being smart, bold. And that means that, yes, I mean, I use an acronym of bold, business first, that's smart. So if we're going to take bold action, let's make sure that it's got a business outcome, performance outcome first. Open-minded. Bold action means something that's open to the evidence, open to the experience, open to the context, and listening to others, open to try something new, open-minded. Bold also means leading and learning, trying something, let's lead, and also let's learn from it. Let's be willing to embrace leading and learning in our actions. Now, whether we're an ID or a performance consultant or whatever, this bold is important. And D is deliberate. We're not talking about just rushing out and taking bold action, but deliberate, with intent, evidence informed. Yes, there's risk with bold action. Yes, there's an uncertainty. But if we're business first, open-minded, leading and learning, deliberate in the action that we take, that's what I'm seeing in the high-performing teams. So be bold, be smart, bold.
That's a great summary. It kind of captures most of the discussion that we also had, somewhere. So excellent. I think I love that acronym, bold, smart, bold. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. I would also want to ask you one last question. What are you reading right now, if you are anything, or what did you read last? And if there's any recommendation for our audience.
Oh my goodness. You know me, I have got such a pile of books here.
Give me top two that you would recommend.
I've been reading a lot of things like you have, but I don't know whether you can see this one or you can't really see
not coming out.
Okay.
Yeah, the extended mind.
Yeah.
Loving
this one because it comes back to those thinking habits that we've been talking about before, and this gives us great tips as learning professionals in here to be thinking about, how we can help people to kind of think and to own their learning, to learn how to learn how to grow and to be extended and stretched. But what I love about it is that it gives us tips of how we can do this for ourselves. And so that for me is is the one that probably I would recommend it. But you've read this one, yeah?
No, I haven't
Not
yet.
yet.
So
Oh my
that's
goodness.
a good recommendation for me as well.
Yeah, I'm absolutely loving this one.
Fantastic.
So I would certainly recommend that you
Excellent.
have a look at that, because of
Absolutely.
looking. I think we do need to look in. We need to look after ourselves.
Yeah.
And we've got to look after our own learning. We've got to look after our own thinking.
Yeah.
And all the help we can get,
Fantastic.
we
So
need. What about you? What are you reading?
Oh, I just started this book a few days ago, which is Deep Work,
Ooh,
Cal Newport.
okay.
And I think this is excellent. This is about how some of the greatest achievers have achieved what they have by almost locking themselves up for months or weeks or even hours on a regular practice. And I was thinking about this when we were discussing this for L&D to start looking at it in a newer way. Maybe they need to assign a little bit of deep work time for themselves. But yeah, it's a good book. I'm halfway through it yet.
Oh, I feel personally I need that one right now.
I think it's a great one. So far, an
Yeah,
excellent one. Yeah.
fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. It's been a pleasure always to catch up and learn from you. Thank you once again for today. I think it was a fantastic conversation. Really loved it. Very insightful. Thank you.
Oh, always a pleasure as well, Amit. Thank you very much.